Russia's President Vladimir Putin just made a significant statement to the supreme leader of Iran. And folks, let me tell you, it's sounding very biblical. All right, folks, let's get into this one. I have to tell you this. The headline of this article is pretty remarkable, and we're going to get into it in just a second. But I want to say that at the time that I'm recording this, it is actually Tuesday. And so war, full-blown war, has not broken out in Israel yet, or in Iran or Lebanon or any of the areas that we expect something to happen. We know Hezbollah is getting a lot more aggressive. We know that, of course, after the death of several of the recent leaders at the hands of Israel, things have been getting very, very tense. And there's been a lot of stuff that's going on. And of course, we do expect full-out war to happen, especially because of the threats that Khomeini has been making and many of the other threats that have been coming from Hezbollah and many of the proxies of Iran. Now, with that said, whether or not Israel is at war, or at least more significantly at war, at the time that you are watching this video, this article is going to bear a significant amount of importance with respect to the content, because it has some bearing on what I believe is going to happen in the future based on what we read in the book of Ezekiel. So this is really important to pay attention to, because Russia is right off the bat inserting itself into this conflict. It had for a long time. We know that it's been the case, but Russia's being more vocal about it, to the point where even the sayings and the admonitions that are being given by Russia to other nations is being leaked to the press. And I believe it's being leaked to the press directly by them in some context. Now, there's a reason for this, and I think that it is a very sophisticated and well choreographed process that Putin is going through, in that what he is seeking to do at virtually every turn is make sure he positions himself in a way where he has the kind of control over the Mideast that he is seeking to bring, especially where Libya is sort of at his fingertips and he is almost in full control of that country. And so as things begin to change, as the effect that he has on Syria, and in many cases, Syria's foreign policy, especially in the local area of other nations that surround Syria, with the influence that it's having right now, even in the Arabian Peninsula, with the effect that it has on Iran and how Iran has been helping them, all of this bears a substantial amount of significance, because it puts together a much larger picture for us to contemplate, and that picture is critically important. So let me show you what this article says. It says, Putin urges Iran's Khomeini to show restraint as Israel braces for attack. The article starts off by saying the message was reportedly delivered by a top Kremlin ally during meetings with Iranian officials as the Islamic Republic considers its reaction to Ismail Haniyeh's death. So for those of you that don't know the story of what happened to Ismail Haniyeh is the political leader of Hamas. Actually, a lot of people called him the president. They called him the chief politician. He is the front-facing person for Hamas in terms of the diplomacy world, if you want to call it the diplomacy world. He went to Tehran to basically celebrate, in essence, to show his respect to the new president who was being installed in Iran, of course, being voted in because Khomeini appoints him and lets it happen. That's a whole other story. But anyway, the new president of Iran, he goes to show his respects, to congratulate him, of course, being on the heels of the fact that Abdullahian and Raisi, the president of Iran, were both killed together in a helicopter crash. And that's a whole other story. Certainly, there had to have been some Israeli involvement even in that. We'll just leave that be. We won't even get involved in it. So the ceremony happens. Everything is all finished. He pays his respects. Everything is good. He says, congratulations. What a happy moment. In the security and under the secure facility of Iran, this president goes back to, if you want to call him a president, this political leader goes back to his room, and an explosion takes place and he is killed. And of course, it is believed that Israel did that. But what's interesting is he was killed in Tehran. And this is the thing that's really interesting, because if he's killed in Tehran, that means that, of course, a very powerful message was sent by, of course, Israel, telling them nowhere you can hide. We are coming after every single one of these leaders who have chosen to do this evil to our people, and we're not going to let them get away with it. Of course, Iran is very angered by this, and I understand why. They have to show themselves strong because they just pretty much lost a leader that they were supposed to be protecting, and they could not protect him. And again, the picture is a very powerful one in that you can run, but you can't hide. I can promise you, you will not get away with it. That's the message that Israel sent. So this is where the article gets interesting. Here's what it says. Russian President Vladimir Putin has urged Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, to respond with restraint to Israel's killing of a Hamas leader, specifically advising against attacks on Israeli civilians, two senior Iranian sources have revealed. It goes on to say, the message was reportedly delivered on Monday by Sergei Shoigu, a close ally of Putin, during meetings with Iranian officials as the Islamic Republic contemplates its response to the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, which it blames on Israel. Of course, Israel undoubtedly did it. They said no comment, but they did. And I do think it's interesting when you think about how this message is being delivered to Iran on behalf of Russia. That's a whole other story. We'll talk about this because Sergei is very, very close, by the way, to Vladimir Putin. That's a whole different story for a different time. We could talk about that later. Look what it goes on to say in the next paragraph. It says, during the talks, Tehran also pressed Moscow to supply Russian-made Sukhoi Su-35 fighter jets, according to the two Iranian sources familiar with the meeting in Tehran. The Kremlin in Moscow did not respond to a request for comment. However, Russia's state news agency RIA reported on Tuesday that Shoigu confirmed discussing Haniyeh's killing during the visit to Tehran. The sources, who claimed to be knowledgeable about the matter, did not provide further details about the discussions with Shoigu, who transitioned from defense minister to secretary of Russia's Security Council in May. They indicated that Shoigu's visit was one of several channels Moscow used to convey to Iran the need for restraint. At the same time, Russia condemned Haniyeh's killing as a very dangerous targeted killing aiming to prevent war in the Middle East. The sources emphasize that the region was one on the brink of a major conflict, and those responsible for killing were clearly attempting to provoke such a confrontation. I think a lot of people could argue reasonably the opposite. You can see how targeted that attack was. And of course, this is based on the premise that Israel carried that said, if you do this, we will go after the leaders. So this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. Just a little side note that I thought I would throw out. The article finishes off by simply saying Russia has been fostering closer ties with Iran since the outbreak of its war with Ukraine and has announced plans to sign a comprehensive cooperation agreement with Tehran. The Iranian Foreign Ministry did not provide an immediate response. On Monday, it stated that Tehran was not seeking to escalate regional tensions, but felt compelled to punish Israel to prevent further instability. Now, let me tell you why I think this is remarkable. Let me tell you why I think this is really important. Because when you read Ezekiel 38, it makes some things very clear to us about what is going to happen in the future. And by the way, just to remind many of you, because you're all very, very sharp Bible students, Ezekiel 38 gives us a very clear understanding of what's going to be happening in this time. I believe this is right after the rapture, but this is really important because this involves many countries. And of course, for those of you that might not be familiar with this passage, and there may be a few of you that are not, Ezekiel 38 speaks to us of a significant, and when I say significant, I mean a remarkably significant attack that takes place on Israel, and it involves a lot of countries. It is led by somebody that the Bible refers to as Gog, presumably the leader of Russia. And there are lots of other countries that are involved. You are talking about Russia. You're talking about Iran. You're talking about Turkey. You're talking about significant nations that are coming together to attack Israel. But the thing that's really important to understand is in this attack, Israel is surprised because it would appear, based on the reading of Ezekiel 38, that all of these nations are actual friends. And so that's the thing that is really surprising. They actually have close ties, or at least are amicable with one another, so much so that Israel actually feels so secure that it doesn't even have fenced cities. In other words, it really has let its guard down because it doesn't really need a guard because of the condition of prosperity and peace. And of course, Russia is going to be one of those friends. And this is why it becomes very, very, very interesting. We'll put up this map for those of you guys that don't remember this or don't know. I will show it to you. And it is an important map to be looking at because this map will help you better to be able to understand what the deployment looks like when you begin to see this happening. Now, according to this map, when you see this, we see lots of nations that are getting involved here. Now, of course, I stole this map from Andy Woods, and I want you to see all the nations that are involved. You see, we're looking at Turkey here. We're looking at Russia. We're looking at the region of Magog, which is all the stands. As you can see, we're talking about Persia, which of course is Iran. We're talking about Kush. We are talking about Put, which is Libya. So there's a lot of nations that are involved in this. They all go to attack Israel. And the thing that's really remarkable are the people that object to it. Saudi Arabia is going to object to it. But let me read something to you here in Ezekiel 38, because it is really important to note the dynamic that exists here. It says this. It says, thou shalt ascend. This is verse 9 of Ezekiel 38. Thou shalt ascend and come like a storm. Thou shalt be like a cloud to cover the land, thou and all thy bands and many people with thee. Thus saith the Lord, it shall come to pass that at the same time shall things come into my mind that thou shalt think an evil thought, and thou shalt say, I will go to the land. Notice this, of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. Okay, so folks, it's a secure situation. So when I see a news report that tells me that Putin is trying to get involved and in essence encourage restraint with respect to how this situation is being handled, it doesn't surprise me. It shouldn't surprise you. It shouldn't surprise any of us. Why? Because what Putin is trying to do here is Putin, and by the way, he's very effective at doing it. He's not trying to, he's actually doing it quite well, is he is playing referee in this situation. And eventually what's going to end up happening because of the stated and very obvious weakness of the position of the United States of America, what Putin is going to end up doing is he is going to insert himself even more into the place of marked leadership in this area. Keep this in mind. If you are actually looking right now at a map of northern Iraq, and you can see the connection that exists between Turkey and Syria and Iran, and then below Iraq, where you see Saudi Arabia, and to the left, you see Jordan and this whole area leading down into Kuwait, and you see the Persian Gulf. You can understand why it's important for Russia to be close to countries like Turkey and Iran and Syria, and yes, even Iraq, and of course, Saudi Arabia. All of these people, it's in Russia's best interest to be friends with all of them. And as a matter of fact, if you zoom out a little bit, you'll notice that Russia already has a presence in the Red Sea. It has a relationship with Sudan. It has a relationship, yes, believe it or not, with Egypt. And there are some interesting implications that carries because of its involvement with Libya. Russia is half of the civil war that's going on in Libya, and they are about to win. And remember, where Russia stands, you need to keep in mind that the effect that they have upon Libya is going to be very important when you begin to understand the southern portion of the Mediterranean, because they will control literally the lower half of the Mediterranean, which will begin to control their interests when you begin to look at the gateway from the Mediterranean up over northern Africa, out, of course, across Morocco, in between Morocco and Spain, out to the Atlantic Ocean. It's very significant. And Russia is looking to seriously control that area. And by the way, if you're looking at Libya right now and you go further south of Libya, specifically south and a little bit more west, the southwest, you'll see Niger, which is destabilizing in a significant way, especially considering that within the next month, the United States of America will be completely withdrawn. At least its Air Force will be completely withdrawn. Its air base will be no more. It's already wrapped up. So you're seeing destabilization happening everywhere, and that is going to create a vacuum. And that vacuum is being actively filled right now by Russia's leadership. Russia is brokering all kinds of actions and deals taking place amongst all of these countries. And what a lot of people don't realize, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more extensively, is all of these brokerages that are happening, all of these deals are putting Russia in a very specific place where idealistically speaking, they're becoming the controllers of this area in the Middle East. And that is going to prove to be remarkably beneficial and mutually beneficial, by the way, to nations like Turkey, because the more Russia begins to work in its interests to take over all of these things, the more strategic it's going to become. And of course, the fact that Russia continues to have a comfortable relationship with Israel makes it a lot easier to sort of maneuver through all of this stuff, especially as conflict begins to rise with Iran. And as you begin to see changes happening in what people would call the West Bank, we're actually talking about here, I call it Judea, Samaria. It's a significant change. It's having a significant difference. And don't even get me started on the relationship of the Palestinian Authority to Russia and what all of that means. But folks, all of this makes sense. It would make sense that Russia would take on the position of seeking to encourage restraint. It would make sense why they're doing what they're doing, because they stand to win. They control an overwhelming majority of all of these interests, because by doing so, they default themselves to be in a position where they will, in essence, do the very thing that Ezekiel 38 tells us is going to happen. By the way, I should note this about Ezekiel 38. We are told in Ezekiel 38 that when this attack happens, Israel won't be able to defend herself. As a matter of fact, nobody will be able to stop Russia and the conglomerate of nations that are with Russia from doing what they're doing. As a matter of fact, let me take it a step further. What's even more remarkable about that picture, and what makes even more I think of, there's an astounding property by it, is to think that there will be nations that will object, specifically Saudi Arabia. They're going to say, what in the world are you doing? But they're not going to get involved militaristically, which would seem to imply there will be no superpowers. And the only one that will defend Israel successfully will be God himself, who will intervene and destroy these nations that have chosen to come against Israel. So let me just simply say this. It's not a good idea to bet against Israel based on what we know with respect to Ezekiel and just based on the whole Bible. You can look all over the Bible and you can learn that very lesson. It's very, very easy to learn that lesson. But here's the thing that I think is even more important to understand and remember. We are rapidly approaching these days. It's becoming more and more obvious that the world we are in this very moment is manifesting in a significant way. Now, some of you will say, well, James, does that mean it's going to happen tomorrow? Does it mean it's going to happen, in a month or two? I don't know. But I can tell you this, Christ could come at any moment. Now, when is that going to be? I don't know. It could be years from now. All I know is as I see these signs, it's an encouragement to me to seek the Lord like I've never sought him before. It's an encouragement to me to keep my eyes on him, to look to him, to preach the gospel, to study the word, to get to know and recognize and realize the very thing that I believe God wants me to do. And I think it's a time for all of us. It's really exciting to live because God has given us this awesome opportunity to take a stand for righteousness and to really stand behind the truth that God has told us to, right? This world is in decline, but God has given us a hope. He's given us peace. He's given us understanding and discernment. And most importantly, he's giving us a way to follow. And folks, every day that goes by is becoming darker and darker in this world. But as it becomes darker and darker, our lights shine brighter and brighter, which means the very hope that lies within us becomes more significant. Folks, as the days get darker for the world, they get better for us. They get brighter for us. And that's exciting. We have a lot to look forward to. Christ could come at any moment. Let's get into this, folks. This is a big deal. God bless you.